a prince mocked a homeless woman in the town square, unaware she was his long-lost sister. Upon discovering the truth, he fell to his knees weeping. Family secrets spilled out, and their lives changed forever in ways no one could have imagined. A story of redemption, forgiveness, and unwavering love. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. The wind sliced through the Salinas Valley like a sharp knife as Elena surveyed the plain stretching to the horizon. The cornfields, once golden and vibrant, now resembled a sea of dry, brittle stalks under the grey October sky. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold morning air, and she pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The first dewdrops still glistened on the withered leaves like frozen tears clinging to time. At 42, her face retained the simple beauty of women from the Salinas Valley. Lines around her eyes that spoke of equal parts laughter and tears, skin tanned from years of working under the sun, and calloused hands that told stories without words. The silver strands beginning to weave through her dark hair seemed to hold memories of more generous times. "The fields don't lie, Elena," said Tom, the old foreman, his heavy steps crunching on the damp earth as he approached. "It's going to be a rough winter." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the landscape. Since her father's death the previous year, the small family farm, Green Valley Ranch, had fallen under her responsibility. The promise of a meager harvest meant more than mere discomfort. It was a threat to their survival. "How much time do we have to decide?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear that was accumulating in her chest, like thin ice on a lake's surface. 2 weeks, maybe less. If it doesn't rain by then." Tom left the sentence unfinished, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them like a thick fog. "Johnny and Lily can't go through another winter hungry," Eleanor said, thinking of her nieces and nephew sleeping in the simple house behind them. The children had come into her care after her sister's death during a difficult childbirth 3 years prior. Her sister's husband, unable to cope with the grief and responsibilities, had left for Los Angeles in search of work and never returned. "So, what are you planning to do?" Eleanor felt the weight of the question on her already weary shoulders. The nearby town offered few opportunities, especially for a single woman with 2 children under her care. The Montgomery family, owners of the largest ranch in the region and longtime rivals of her father, had expressed interest in buying Green Valley Ranch for a fraction of its true value. The proposition, once unthinkable, now circled her mind like a vulture over ravaged fields. "I'll go to the Salinas Farmers Market," she decided, straightening her shoulders. "Maybe I can sell some of my embroidery and cheese to buy more seeds. We need to try new crops before the cold sets in." Tom frowned, worry etched on his weathered face. "The road's dangerous after the recent rains, and it's a 4-hour walk." "I don't have a choice," she replied simply. "Keep an eye on the kids while I'm gone. I'll be back before nightfall." The sky was beginning to lighten when Elena woke her nieces and nephew. Johnny, 10, with his inquisitive eyes, and Lily, 7, with her smile that could melt even the coldest days. She offered them a simple breakfast, freshly made tortillas with a thin layer of butter, a luxury she saved for special occasions. "I'm going to town today," she explained as the children ate. "When I get back, we can start planning our new crops, the ones using the techniques we read about in the teacher's book." "Can I come with you?" Johnny asked, his eyes shining with interest. "I can help carry things." Eleanor smiled, running a hand through the boy's dark hair. "Not this time. You need to help Tom with the repairs in the barn. Winter's coming and we need to be prepared." After packing a small basket with artisanal cheeses, some delicate embroidery, and the last apples from the orchard, Elena said goodbye to the children and began her walk along the winding road that snaked between the hills. The Salinas Farmers Market was already bustling when she arrived. Merchants and farmers from all over the region set up their stalls under a sky that now displayed a pale, almost hesitant blue. Eleanor settled into a small space between a spice vendor and an elderly woman selling medicinal herbs. Hours passed slowly. A few buyers stopped, examined her goods, haggled over prices, but few made purchases. The regional economy was suffering, and everyone was tightening their belts in anticipation of a harsh winter. By midday, Elena had sold only 2 pieces of embroidery and a small cheese, barely enough to buy the necessary seeds. That's when she noticed a tall man watching her from afar. Richard Montgomery, the only son of the family coveting Green Valley Ranch, approached with the confident stride of someone who knew their worth in the world. "Eleanor," he greeted, inclining his head slightly. "I wasn't expecting to find you here." "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, maintaining her composure despite her aversion to him. Richard, nearing 50, was known for his business acumen and the way he expanded his holdings at the expense of struggling small farmers. "Your land still isn't yielding the fruits you hoped for?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his thin lips. "Green Valley Ranch is exactly as it should be," Eleanor replied, arranging her embroidery with dignity. "The cycles of the land have their ups and downs, as you well know." "Indeed." Richard picked up one of the cheeses, examining it with calculated interest. "My offer for the property still stands, you know. In fact, considering the circumstances, keeping it unchanged is generous of me." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her voice controlled. "And my answer remains the same, Mr. Montgomery. Green Valley Ranch has belonged to my family for 3 generations. It's not for sale. Everyone has their price, Elena," he replied, returning the cheese to the table. "Especially when winter is approaching and there are children to feed. Think it over and know where to find me when you change your mind." With a brief gesture, Richard walked away, leaving Elena with a knot in her stomach and the uncomfortable feeling that time was running out faster than she cared to admit. At the end of the afternoon, with her basket lighter and a few coins in her pocket, Elena started the walk back home. The clouds had returned, denser and more menacing, and the wind carried the distant scent of rain. She quickened her pace, aware that she needed to reach Green Valley Ranch before the storm broke. In her mind, Richard's words echoed like danger warnings. She knew his offer represented immediate security, enough money to comfortably get through the winter, perhaps even to move to the city and provide a better education for Johnny and Lily. But it also meant giving up her family legacy, the memories held within every tree, every stone, and every furrow of land. When she finally spotted the silhouette of the small adobe house on the horizon, the first raindrop fell on her face, mixing with a solitary tear she hadn't even realized she'd shed. Elena wiped them both away with the back of her hand and continued walking, determined to find a solution that didn't involve losing the only thing that still connected her to everything she loved. The approaching storm seemed to mirror the tempest in her heart, but Elena knew that after every rain, no matter how hard, the earth always held the promise of new life. She just needed to find the right seed to plant. The rain continued for 3 days and 3 nights, as if the sky was determined to wash away all the earth's wounds. Eleanor watched the drops slide down the fogged window pane as she sewed in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. The fabric under her skillful fingers transformed into figures of flowers and birds, a small world of colors that contrasted with the persistent gray outside. "Aunt Elena," Lily called, approaching silently with the light steps of a child. "The roof is making that noise again." Elena lifted her eyes from her embroidery and tilted her head, catching the rhythmic sound of drops falling into a bucket in the children's room. Another problem to add to the ever-growing list. "Don't worry," she smiled at her niece, setting the embroidery aside. "It's just until the rain passes. We'll fix it afterward." Lily nodded, her large dark eyes too serious for a girl her age. "Johnny said he'll fix it when he grows up. He says he'll build a big house like Mr. Montgomery's." Elena felt a tightness in her chest at the mention of the name. Since their encounter at the farmer's market, Richard Montgomery had sent 2 messengers to Green Valley Ranch with progressively larger offers for the property. The temptation grew proportionally to the difficulties. "This house has a lot of history, Lily," she said softly, pulling the girl onto her lap. "It was built by your great-grandfather, adobe by adobe. They say he mixed the mud with the straw himself. How did he know how to build such a pretty house?" "Oh, he had a special method," Elena smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her niece's ear. "He said a good house is like a good life. It needs adobes of all sizes and shapes. The big ones give strength, the small ones fill the empty spaces, and the secret is how they all fit together." Lily's eyes shone with interest as she absorbed the simple wisdom, storing it like a treasure. A distant thunderclap shook the house, and the wind howled more fiercely around the windows. Elena hugged her niece a little tighter, feeling simultaneously protective and vulnerable. Winter had barely begun, and the resources she had managed to gather wouldn't last until spring. The next morning, the rain finally stopped, leaving behind a washed and bright world. Eleanor rose before dawn as usual and found Johnny already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with an open notebook in front of him. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked, lighting the wood stove to prepare breakfast. "I'm drawing a plan," the boy replied, showing a detailed drawing of what appeared to be an irrigation system. "I read in the book Mr. Raoul lent us that we can use rainwater to water the plants. If we build gutters around the house and barn, we can collect the water in barrels and use it when we need it." Elena examined the drawing with surprise and pride. "That's very clever, Johnny. Where did you learn about irrigation systems?" "In the book Mr. Raoul lent me," he explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It has many ideas for small farms, ideas that don't need a lot of money." A spark of hope ignited in Elena's heart. Raul Mendoza, the young teacher at the local school, had always shown a special interest in Johnny due to his sharp intelligence and insatiable curiosity. Perhaps he could help in some way. "I'll go to school today," Elena decided, serving a bowl of atole for her nephew. "I want to talk to your teacher about those books." After breakfast and making sure the children were properly dressed for the cold day, Elena walked to the small village school. The simple two-room building housed about 20 children of all ages under the dedicated tutelage of Raul Mendoza. Elena waited patiently outside until recess, watching through the fogged window as the children bent over their notebooks, absorbing knowledge like dry earth absorbs water. When the bell rang signaling the break, Raul noticed her presence and came out to greet her with a warm smile. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," greeted the 25-year-old young teacher, whose bright eyes and gentle manners had quickly earned the respect of the community. "Excuse me for showing up unannounced," Eleanor began. "Johnny showed me a book you lent him about agricultural techniques." "Ah, yes," Raoul smiled enthusiastically. "Your nephew has a brilliant mind. He absorbs information like a sponge and makes connections that even surprise me. He drew a system for collecting rainwater," Elena explained. "It seems promising, but I fear it's only theory. I don't have the resources for materials, and my knowledge is limited to the traditional agriculture I learned from my father." Raoul looked at Elena for a moment, as if assessing something beyond the spoken words. "I have more books that can help," he offered. "And my brother, Eduardo, recently returned from the State University, where he studied agricultural engineering. He's implemented new techniques on our family plot that might be useful for Green Valley Ranch." Elena's heart quickened with a mixture of hope and caution. "Would it be too much to ask for advice from your brother?" "Not at all," Raoul replied promptly. "In fact, Eduardo has been talking about forming a kind of cooperative among the small farmers in the region, sharing resources, knowledge, resistant seeds. Together, perhaps we can resist the pressure of the large landowners." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat at those words. It had been so long since someone offered help without expecting something in return that she barely knew how to react. "The Montgomery family won't be happy," she commented, reality intruding on her moment of hope. Raoul shrugged with a determined smile. "The Montgomerys already own half the land in the valley. They don't need ours too." 2 hours later, Elena was walking back home with light steps despite the mud hindering her progress. In her bag, she carried 3 borrowed books and an invitation to visit the Mendoza property the following Sunday, where Eduardo would explain his ideas for the cooperative. In the distance, Green Valley Ranch emerged from the mist like a ship anchored in a sea of wet earth. The adobe walls, worn by time but still firm, seemed to whisper stories of generations who had faced equally difficult winters and survived to see spring again. Elena paused for a moment to contemplate the vision. The property might be worn, the fields might be dormant, but there was life pulsing beneath the surface, just as there was undiscovered strength within herself. As she resumed her walk, a resolution formed in her heart. As solid as the adobes that held up her house, Green Valley Ranch would not be sold. No matter the challenges that came, she would find a way to preserve her family's legacy and build a future for Johnny and Lily. The cold wind cut across her face, but Elena barely felt it. In her mind, the seed of a plan was already beginning to sprout, a plan that would demand more courage and determination than she had ever needed to show, but that could transform not only her destiny, but perhaps that of the entire community. Upon arriving home, she found Tom in the barn, trying to fix an old wagon. "Good news?" asked the foreman, noticing the determined expression on Elena's face. "Maybe," she replied, a slight smile appearing on her lips. "Tom, what do you think about learning some new tricks after all these years?" The old foreman raised his eyebrows, surprised, but then laughed, a rough, rusty sound that seemed to have been silenced by disuse. "Eleanor, to save Green Valley Ranch, I'd even learned to dance. And for the first time in many months, Elena laughed too, the sound resonating in the adobe walls like long-forgotten music. Sunday dawned clear and cold, with the pale winter sun casting a golden light on the frost that covered the fields like powdered sugar. Elena fastened the simple necklace that had belonged to her mother, a small luxury she rarely wore, and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The last few days had brought a spark of hope to her eyes, an almost imperceptible softening of the tension she carried on her shoulders. "For you're pretty, Aunt Eleanor," Lily said from the doorway, already dressed in her best dress, a light blue one with small embroidered flowers that Eleanor had made for her last birthday. Eleanor smiled at her niece. "You're beautiful too, sweetheart." Johnny joined them in the hallway, wearing the only formal clothes he owned, already a little short in the wrists and ankles due to the boy's rapid growth. "Remember," Eleanor said as they walked towards the Mendoza property, "we're going to talk about ideas to improve Green Valley Ranch. Behave yourselves and listen carefully." "Mr. Raoul said there's a creek on their property," Johnny commented, jumping over a puddle, "and that his brother built a system to use the power of the water to generate energy." Elena nodded, feeling a mixture of admiration and insecurity. Eduardo Mendoza had studied in the capital for 5 years, returning with knowledge she could barely comprehend. How would he react to seeing the simplicity of Green Valley Ranch, the worn tools, the outdated methods? The Mendoza property, while not as large as the Montgomery ranches, impressed with the organization and innovation evident in every detail. The main house, built in traditional style but maintained in perfect condition, was surrounded by well-planned gardens that, even in winter, exhibited an austere beauty with their perennial plants and geometric structures. Raoul greeted them at the entrance, his warm smile dissipating some of the tension Elena felt. "Welcome. Eduardo is in the shed checking the water filtration system, but he'll be here for lunch," he explained, leading them inside the cozy house. Elena's eyes absorbed every detail. The simple but well-preserved furniture, the books organized on shelves that covered an entire wall, the small touches that transformed a house into a home. "Your house is wonderful," she commented sincerely. "Our parents left it to us when they passed away 5 years ago," Raoul explained, with a touch of melancholy in his usually cheerful voice. "Eduardo and I decided to keep it exactly as they loved it, only adding some practical updates." As if summoned by his brother's words, the kitchen door opened and Eduardo Mendoza entered, bringing with him the cold air from outside and an almost palpable energy that seemed to fill the room. Elena had seen Eduardo a few times in town, but she had never properly conversed with him. The 35-year-old man had the same warm smile as his brother, although his eyes conveyed a different intensity, that of someone constantly analyzing, calculating, planning. "Elena," he greeted, extending a calloused hand that spoke of theory joined to practice. "Raoul has told me a lot about you and Green Valley Ranch." "I hope he's told you more good things than problems," Elena replied, trying to maintain a light tone despite the nervousness she felt. Eduardo smiled. "Problems are often just opportunities in disguise. At least that's what I try to believe." Lunch was served in the simple but elegant dining room, an aromatic mole accompanied by freshly made tortillas and preserved vegetables from the previous autumn. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, jumping from everyday topics to discussions about the weather, soil conditions in the region, and the difficulties faced by small producers. It was after dessert, a simple pumpkin sweet that made Lily's eyes shine with pleasure, that Eduardo finally addressed the main reason for the visit. "Raoul mentioned that your nephew had some interesting ideas for using rainwater," he began, turning his gaze towards Johnny, who straightened in his chair with a mixture of pride and shyness. "I showed my drawing to Mr. Raoul," the boy confirmed. "I read about similar systems in the book he lent me. I'd like to see that drawing." Eduardo smiled encouragingly. "And then, if you don't mind, I could show you some of the implementations we've made here. Maybe they can give you ideas for Green Valley Ranch." 2 hours later, Eleanor was walking with Eduardo through the Mendoza property, while Raoul entertained the children with educational games in the house. Her thoughts swirled like leaves in the wind as she tried to process everything she had seen. The rainwater collection system, very similar to the one Johnny had drawn, but expanded to irrigate the entire orchard. The small mill that harnessed the power of the creek. The composting method that transformed waste into rich fertilizer. The simple greenhouses that protected delicate crops from the intense cold. "It's impressive," she finally said, stopping at the edge of the creek that flowed with renewed strength after the recent rains. But I'm afraid most of these implementations are beyond my means. I don't have the resources, the technical knowledge, or enough manpower. Eduardo looked at her for a moment, his eyes reflecting the stream of the creek. You underestimate your resources, Elena. Please, just Elena, she corrected automatically. And what resources do I have that I'm not seeing? To begin with, you have a nephew with a brilliant mind for intuitive engineering, he replied promptly. You have Tom, who knows that land better than any graduate agronomist could hope to know. You have your own skillful hands. I saw the embroidery you sell at the farmer's market. And most importantly, you have Green Valley Ranch. Green Valley Ranch is almost unproductive, Elena countered, the old frustration coloring her voice. Green Valley Ranch has something that no Montgomery money can buy, Eduardo continued, bending down to pick up a smooth stone from the creek bed. It has history, identity, and a strategic location in the valley that, if used correctly, could transform it into the center of a small agricultural revolution. Elena frowned, confused. I don't understand. Eduardo turned the stone between his fingers for a moment before throwing it into the water, creating concentric circles that expanded gently. What do you see when you look at these circles? Water moving, she replied, unsure where this conversation was leading. I see influence, Eduardo smiled, like an idea that starts small at a central point and gradually expands, touching increasingly distant places. He turned to look at her directly. Elena, I'm proposing that Green Valley Ranch become the center of the cooperative I mentioned, the point where it all begins. Elena's heart quickened with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Why? Why Green Valley Ranch? Because it's at the geographical center of the valley, with access to all the other small properties. Because it has the oldest and most spacious barn in the region, which could be adapted as a storage and distribution center.
And because, he hesitated briefly, because it's managed by someone whom the other respect and trust. Elena felt her neck to her cheeks. I don't know. Trust me with something so important that we barely know each other. Eduardo remained silent for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. I knew your father, Elena. He showed me a crop rotation specific to our soil type.
It was because of him that I decided to study agronomy. He smiled with a mixture of nostalgia and respect. Your father understood that the true value of the land is not in what we extract from it, but in what we give back, in how we treat it. And from what Raul tells me about how you've maintained Green Valley Ranch against all odds, you inherited more than just his property. The words touched something deep within Elena, a place where she kept the memories of her father, not the weakened man of his last years, but the strong and visionary farmer who had taught her the love of the land and the responsibility of caring for it. What exactly are you proposing? She asked, her voice firmer now. A cooperative of small farmers. We would share resources, knowledge, tools. We would implement new methods in stages, starting with the most urgent, irrigation and water conservation. Then we would focus on crops adapted to our climate and the changes that have been occurring in weather patterns. Elena bit her lip, thoughtful. And the Montgomerys? The Montgomerys thrive by isolating small farmers, making them compete with each other, and then buying their land when they're desperate, Eduardo replied, a trace of determination hardening his usually gentle voice. United, we form a force that even they can't ignore. I don't know if I have enough courage to lead something like that, Elena confessed, looking at her own hands as if searching for an answer in them. Courage is not the absence of fear, Eduardo replied softly. It's the determination to move forward despite it. And that, Elena, you've already shown you have in abundance. Elena lifted her eyes to meet his gaze, surprisingly gentle and confident. The waters of the creek continued to flow beside them, creating a constant murmur that seemed to whisper possibilities. I'll need to think, she finally said. Consult with Tom. Consider the children. Naturally, Eduardo nodded. But don't take too long. Richard Montgomery found out about our initial meetings with other farmers. He won't stand idly by while we organize resistance. As they walked back to the main house, the sun began its descent on the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. Elena felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice, terrified by the potential fall, but strangely drawn to the possibility of flight that presented itself. Green Valley Ranch had always been her safe haven, the place where she knew every stone, every tree, every inch of soil. What Eduardo proposed meant transforming it into something bigger, more exposed, and, inevitably, more vulnerable. But as she watched Johnny and Lily playing with Raoul in the garden, their faces illuminated by smiles that had become rare in recent difficult times, Elena felt a core of determination form within her. If there was a possibility, however small, of offering them a future in Green Valley Ranch, a future of dignity and purpose, not just survival, she had no right to refuse it out of fear. "Think of this as planting a new seed," Eduardo said, "with the difference that this time you won't be planting alone." When Elena and the children returned to Green Valley Ranch that night, the sky was dotted with stars that seemed closer and brighter than they had ever noticed. A silent promise floating above their heads. The next morning dawned colder than the previous ones. Elena woke before dawn, her mind still processing the conversation with Eduardo. The proposal of the cooperative swirled in her head like corn leaves in the wind, showing different facets with each turn. Possibilities, risks, hopes, fears. She went out into the yard wrapped in her shawl, watching how the first light transformed the valley from shadows into recognizable shapes. In the distance, the Montgomery land stretched like a dark green cloak, nourished by the best irrigation systems money could buy. The contrast with the smaller plots, many of them yellowish from drought, was a constant reminder of the inequality that Eduardo sought to combat. "Made a decision yet?" Tom asked, appearing silently beside her, a steaming cup of coffee in his calloused hands. Elena gratefully accepted the cup, feeling the warmth penetrate her cold fingers. "How do you know I have a decision to make?" The old foreman smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "I've known you since you were crawling among the furrows, Elena. You have the same expression your father had when he was planning something big." Elena felt a pang of emotion at the comparison. Eduardo Mendoza proposes that Green Valley Ranch be the center of a cooperative of small farmers. He says that together we could resist the Montgomerys, implement new techniques, share resources. Tom nodded slowly, his gaze lost in the horizon. Young Mendoza is smart. His father would have approved of this idea. But is it realistic, Tom? Or are we clinging to an impossible dream? Richard could offer enough money for the children to have a good education in the city. "Children need more than education. They need roots," Tom replied, with the simple wisdom that had always characterized him. "Besides, Elena, what would you do in the city? Your life is here in the land." Elena knew the old man was right. The idea of moving to the city, of becoming one among the crowd, of waking up each morning without the open horizon before her, caused her a feeling of suffocation. "I'm afraid, Tom," she confessed softly. "What if we fail? What if I'm not capable of leading this? Remember when your father taught you to ride? You were 7 years old and terrified." Tom smiled at the memory. "But once you got on that horse, nobody could get you off. You don't fear hard work, Elena. You fear disappointing those who depend on you. But that's precisely what will make you succeed." The sun now fully illuminated the valley, and with it, Elena felt a new clarity in her heart. "There's a lot of work to do," she finally said. "We should start today." The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eduardo visited Green Valley Ranch twice, bringing with him detailed plans and basic materials to begin with the water collection system. Johnny followed the engineer like a shadow, absorbing every word, every explanation, his young mind quickly adapting to concepts that Elena found challenging. Meanwhile, Raoul had spoken to 5 other small farmers in the area, all interested in the cooperative but cautious. The shadow of the Montgomerys was long, and many feared reprisals. "They need to see concrete results before committing," Eduardo explained as he supervised the installation of the first gutters on the roof of the main house. "Once they see how the water system increases their harvests, they'll be convinced." Elena worked tirelessly alongside the men, learning to bend the metal for the gutters, to calculate angles of inclination to maximize collection, to seal the joints against leaks. Her hands, already calloused from years of agricultural work, now added new calluses to her collection, each one a testament to her determination. At night, while the children slept, she studied the books Raoul had lent her by lamplight, learning about crop rotation, composting, seed selection. There was so much she didn't know, so much to learn. Sometimes the weight of responsibility overwhelmed her. One afternoon, while working in the experimental orchard they had started near the house, she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. She looked up to see Richard Montgomery dismounting in front of her house, followed by 2 of his foremen. Eleanor's heart quickened, but she forced herself to maintain her composure, wiping her hands on her apron before approaching to greet them. "Mr. Montgomery," she greeted with calculated formality. "What brings you to Green Valley Ranch?" Richard observed with evident disgust the half-installed gutters and the newly prepared plots. "I see you've been busy, Eleanor. I was wondering why you haven't responded to my latest offer." "I've been considering other options," she replied, aware of Richard's penetrating gaze searching for signs of weakness. "Other options?" Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Are you referring to this cooperative that the Mendozas are trying to organize? It's a project doomed to fail, Elena. Small farmers can't compete with established ranches like ours." Elena felt a surge of indignation rise in her throat, but she contained it. "Each farmer makes their own decisions, Mr. Montgomery. Mine is to keep Green Valley Ranch in the family." Richard dismounted and approached her, lowering his voice so that only Eleanor could hear him. "Let me be frank, Eleanor. The Mendozas are using you. They need your land because of its location, that's all. Once they get what they want, they'll leave you alone with debts you won't be able to pay." "And your offer is selfless?" Elena retorted, keeping her voice firm despite the inner tremor she felt. "At least the Mendozas offer an opportunity, not just money in exchange for surrender." Richard's face hardened. "The opportunity they offer is an illusion. When the bank comes to collect your loans and you have nothing to pay with, remember this conversation. My offer still stands, but not for long." With those words, he remounted his horse and left, leaving Elena with a heavy feeling in her stomach. The doubts she had managed to keep at bay during the week returned with renewed force. What if Richard was right? What if she was risking the children's future for an impossible dream? That night, after putting Johnny and Lily to bed, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the full moon bathe the valley in its silvery light. From somewhere nearby, the call of an owl broke the silence of the night, its melancholic call resonating with the uncertainty in her heart. "You can't sleep," Tom said, more a statement than a question as he sat on the step beside her. "Richard Montgomery came today," Eleanor replied, her voice barely audible. "He said the Mendozas are just using me, that the cooperative will fail." Tom remained silent for a moment, contemplating the moon. "Do you know why the Montgomerys want your land so much, Elena?" "Because of its location, I suppose. It's in the center of the valley." "It's more than that," the old man leaned forward. "Your grandfather, Francisco, chose this place not only for the view or the fertile land. He chose it because underground streams converge here. And a Green Valley Ranch runs the purest water in the valley." Elena looked at him with surprise. "Underground water? Are you sure?" "Your father knew. He showed me the old maps before he got sick. The Montgomerys know it too. That's why they've been trying to buy this land for years." Tom took Elena's hand in his. "Green Valley Ranch isn't just land, Elena. It's life. In the right hands, it could transform the whole valley." The revelation fell upon Elena like a blessing and a burden at the same time. If what Tom said was true, the cooperative made even more sense, but it also explained Richard's insistence and increased the danger. "Why didn't you tell me before, Tom?" "Because I had to be sure you wouldn't sell to the Montgomerys," the old man replied simply. "Now I know you won't." Elena looked towards the horizon, where the lights of the Montgomery Ranch shone in the distance like fallen stars. The battle for Green Valley Ranch was just beginning, but now she fully understood what was at stake. "Tomorrow I'll talk to Eduardo," she decided. "We need to accelerate the cooperative's plans." Tom nodded in approval. "Your father would be proud, Elena. Very proud." As the stars slowly turned in the velvety sky, Eleanor felt a new resolution form within her. Richard Montgomery had tried to sow fear in her heart, but instead, he had strengthened her determination. Green Valley Ranch was not only her home and her inheritance, it was the key to the future of the entire community. With this certainty, she finally returned to the interior of the house, where Johnny and Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the battles being waged for their future. Eleanor promised herself that, whatever happened, they would never know the taste of defeat or regret for opportunities not taken. The news about Green Valley Ranch's underground springs changed the course of events like a river finding a new channel. Eduardo, upon hearing Elena's discovery, immediately adapted the cooperative's plans to include a well and water distribution system that would benefit all participating plots. "This explains why the Montgomerys have been so interested in your property," he commented, leaning over the antique maps Tom had unearthed from a forgotten trunk. "With access to this water, they could practically control all the valley's production during droughts." "Do you think they always knew?" Eleanor asked, observing the blue lines marking the underground streams. mostly snaking under her property before branching out to the rest of the valley. No doubt, landowners like the Montgomerys have access to geological surveys that we small farmers don't even know exist. Eduardo traced one of the lines with his finger. What surprises me is that they didn't make a more aggressive offer sooner. They did, Tom interjected from his place by the window. To Alberto, your father, they offered an amount that would have solved all his problems, but he refused. He said the water belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford it. Elena felt a surge of pride hearing about her father. Despite all the hardships, Alberto Alvarez had maintained his principles to the end. The revelation about the springs also accelerated other farmers' interest in the cooperative. In less than 2 weeks, 12 families had committed to participate, contributing labor, tools, and most importantly, renewed hope. Green Valley Ranch's old barn was transformed into the operations center, with maps, calendars, and detailed plans covering its walls. One Saturday morning, as they prepared for the cooperative's first official meeting, Eleanor watched in amazement the transformation that had occurred not only on her property, but throughout the community. Men and women who had barely greeted each other at the farmers' market now worked side by side, sharing knowledge, lending tools, discussing ideas with enthusiasm. It's incredible what hope can achieve, Raul commented, approaching with a tray of coffee for the workers. And a common goal, Elena added, helping him distribute the cups. I fear the Montgomerys won't stand idly by for long. They're already acting, Raul confirmed in a low voice. They've cancelled the credit lines of 2 of our members and are pressuring the local bank to do the same with the others. Elena felt a pang of worry. What can we do? Eduardo has contacted a credit union in the capital. They're interested in our project, especially the sustainable water component. They could provide alternative financing. By midday, the barn was full. Entire families had come for the meeting, from elders who remembered the days before the Montgomerys arrived, to young children playing among the bales of hay stacked in the corners. The atmosphere was festive yet serious, charged with the understanding of what was at stake. Eduardo led the meeting with a mix of authority and humility that Elena had come to admire. He explained the technical aspects clearly, answered questions patiently, and above all listened to the concerns of each member with genuine interest. The first phase will be the water system, he explained, pointing to the blueprints spread out on a makeshift table. We'll start with a main well here at Green Valley Ranch, and then establish a distribution network that will reach each participating property. And what about the costs? Asked Mrs. Josephine, a widow whose small plot barely produced enough to feed her 4 children. Each family will contribute according to their abilities, Eduardo replied. Some with labor, others with materials, others with knowledge. The important thing is that no one will be excluded due to lack of financial resources. Elena observed the expressions of those present, noticing how initial skepticism gradually gave way to hope. Even the most cautious seemed to be infected by the collective enthusiasm. The meeting stretched into the evening, discussing details, assigning responsibilities, establishing a work schedule. When it finally ended, many stayed to share a community meal, spontaneously organized with contributions from all the families. It seems we have a promising start, Eduardo commented, sitting next to Elena as they watched the community gathered around the makeshift tables. Thanks to you, she replied. Without your knowledge, we never would have gotten this far. Eduardo smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the sunset. My knowledge is just tools, Elena. What has truly united these people is something deeper, the respect they feel for you and the trust you've built over the years. Elena felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks. I've only done what anyone would have done in my place. That's precisely what makes you special, he replied softly. You don't realize your own strength. Their gazes met for a moment, and Elena felt something stir within her, like earth awakening after a long winter. The feeling was so unexpected that it disconcerted her, and she quickly diverted the conversation to safer topics. Johnny is completely fascinated by your explanations about the pumping system, she commented, observing her nephew gesticulating animatedly as he explained something to other children. He has an extraordinary mind, Eduardo agreed. With the right education, he could become a brilliant engineer. Do you think that will be possible someday? Elena asked, her voice betraying the doubt that still lingered in her heart. That children like Johnny and Lily can aspire to something more than just surviving off the land? I'm convinced of it, Eduardo replied fervently. In fact, that's one of the long-term goals of the cooperative. to establish an education fund for the children of the members. Prosperity isn't just about improving crops, Elena. It's about cultivating people, ideas, futures. His words resonated deeply with Elena, reminding her of similar conversations with her father years ago. Alberto Alvarez had always dreamed of a future where the value of education was as cherished as that of good land. The celebration continued until the first stars appeared in the sky, but Elena noticed that Tom seemed restless, constantly watching the road leading to the property. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, when she finally managed to pull him away from the crowd. "Richard Montgomery passed through town this morning," the old man explained in a low voice. "He was asking about our meeting. I wouldn't be surprised if he came to say hello." As if Tom's words had summoned him, the sound of several approaching horses interrupted the conversations. People turned towards the road, where Richard Montgomery appeared, riding his impressive black horse, flanked by 4 of his foremen. Silence fell over the assembly as Richard dismounted and approached with deliberately slow steps, his gaze sweeping over the improvements that had been made to Green Valley Ranch, pausing on the displayed plans and the distributed tools. "What a picturesque meeting," he finally commented, his voice dripping with condescension. "It almost seems like you're planning something serious." Eduardo stepped forward, subtly placing his body between Richard and Elena. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery. This is a private meeting of our cooperative. Is there anything we can help you with?" Richard ignored Eduardo, addressing the assembled farmers directly. "I wonder if you all really understand what you're getting yourselves into. Cooperatives sound good in theory, but they require commitment, resources, time, things that many of you can barely afford. That's precisely why we've joined together," Mrs. Josephine replied with unexpected firmness. "To share what we individually lack." Richard looked at her with a mixture of surprise and disdain. Admirable, no doubt, but also naive. The agricultural market doesn't forgive sentimentality. Who will buy your products when I temporarily lower my prices? Who will lend you seeds when your harvests fail? Who will maintain this experiment when the first difficulties appear? Elena felt the tension rising around her. Some farmers exchanged uneasy glances, the doubts that Richard was trying to sow finding fertile ground in their unspoken fears. "Ourselves," Elena replied, stepping forward to stand next to Eduardo. Her voice, clear and firm, surprised even herself. "We will support each other, as we have done for generations before your family came to the valley." Richard's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "Be careful, Elena. Sentimentality can be expensive, especially when it's built on shifting sands." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Elena held his gaze, refusing to show the fear she felt at the implication that Richard knew perfectly well the value of the springs. "We appreciate your concern, Mr. Montgomery," Eduardo interjected diplomatically. "We'll take it into account along with all the other factors we're considering. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a lot of work ahead of us." Richard remained motionless for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those present, as if memorizing each one. Finally, with a slight nod of his head that seemed more like a warning than a greeting, he remounted his horse. "Remember my words when things get complicated," he said before leaving. "My door will always be open, although my offers aren't eternal." The silence that followed his departure weighed like lead. Elena could feel the painstakingly built confidence beginning to crack under the weight of the sown doubts. "Don't let his words affect you," she finally said, her voice rising so that everyone could hear her. "Richard Montgomery isn't afraid that we'll fail. He's afraid that we'll succeed. Why else would he come personally to try to discourage us?" A murmur of agreement ran through the assembly, and gradually the conversations resumed. But Elena knew that Richard's visit had achieved its objective, to plant seeds of doubt that, like weeds, would be difficult to eradicate completely. That night, after the last visitors had left and the children were asleep, Elena found herself again on the porch, contemplating the stars. The weight of the responsibility she had assumed had never seemed so great. "It was impressive today," Eduardo said, appearing silently beside her. "I was terrified," Elena confessed with a small smile, "but something inside me rebelled when I saw how he was trying to manipulate everyone." "That something is what makes you who you are," he replied, sitting next to her on the step. "The same strength that has kept you here, fighting for Green Valley Ranch when others would have sold long ago." They remained silent for a moment, the night air heavy with the fragrances of damp earth and pumpkin blossoms. "Do you think he'll try something else?" Elena finally asked. No doubt, Eduardo nodded. Richard Montgomery isn't a man who easily accepts defeat, but neither are we. In the stillness of the night, that word "we" resonated within Elena with unexpected warmth. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel alone in her struggle. The roots of Green Valley Ranch, like the underground streams that flowed beneath it, were beginning to intertwine with those of the entire community, creating a support network capable of withstanding even the fiercest storms. And perhaps, she thought as she watched Eduardo's profile silhouetted against the starry sky, other equally deep and promising personal roots were also growing. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Winter gave way to an early spring that brought not only the expected rains, but also the first tangible fruits of the cooperative's labor. The water collection system installed at Green Valley Ranch had proven its effectiveness during the recent rains, storing enough water to start the experimental crops much earlier than usual. The improved seeds that Eduardo had obtained through his contacts at the university germinated with renewed vigor, promising more abundant and resistant harvests. For Elena, each green sprout emerging from the dark earth was like a small victory, a testament that they had chosen the right path despite the obstacles. Green Valley Ranch was beginning to live up to its name again, with orderly plots of corn, beans, and squash, the sacred trinity of traditional milpa, now complemented by new crops such as sunflowers and amaranth, selected for their adaptability and nutritional value. "I've never seen the land respond like this," Tom commented one morning, as they inspected the fields together. "It's as if it's grateful for the care." Elena smiled, sharing the old foreman's sentiment. The land had always been generous to those who treated it with respect, but the new methods seemed to have awakened a dormant power within it. The changes weren't limited to the crops. The barn, now completely renovated, functioned as a training center, where cooperative members learned techniques for soil conservation, natural pest control, and food processing to add value to their products. Johnny, who had just turned 11, had become Eduardo's unofficial assistant, absorbing knowledge of engineering and agriculture at a speed that amazed everyone. Lily, for her part, had developed an unexpected talent for botany, meticulously cataloging local plants in an illustrated notebook that Raoul had given her. One afternoon, while Eleanor and other women from the cooperative were working on making seasonal fruit preserves, Mrs. Josephine brought disturbing news from town. "The Montgomerys are buying all the merchandise at the farmer's market," she explained, wiping her hands on her apron. "They're offering higher prices than anyone else, but only to those who aren't part of the cooperative." Elena exchanged worried glances with the others. It was an obvious tactic to create division in the community, resentment between those who had chosen to remain independent and the cooperative members. "They've also bought the building where we were going to open our community store," Mrs. Josephine continued. "They acquired it for triple its real value, just so we couldn't use it." "They're scared," Dolores Ramirez interjected, a middle-aged woman whose small orchard had been transformed into a model of sustainable production thanks to the cooperative's techniques. "Our first harvest is exceeding all expectations. For the next season, we could be competing directly with them in the regional market." Eleanor nodded, aware that Dolores was right. The first batches of harvested vegetables had been of exceptional quality, and the tests of the irrigation system using water from the underground springs promised to revolutionize production even during the dry season. "We need to advance our plans for direct marketing," Elena decided. "If we can't have a store in town, we'll take our products directly to the city." That same afternoon, she called an urgent meeting with Eduardo and the other cooperative leaders. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Elena couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at seeing the barn full of people who just a few months ago had been isolated in their individual struggles. "The Montgomerys are intensifying their opposition as we expected," she began, explaining the latest tactics employed by the family. "We need to adapt our strategy." "I have a proposal," Eduardo interjected, unrolling a map of the region on the central table. "If we can't sell in town, we need to expand our reach. Here on the main road to Salinas, we could set up a direct sales stall. That would require transportation," one of the older farmers objected. "I have an old pickup truck that we can all fix together," Martin Juarez offered, whose plot bordered Elena's. "It's not much, but it would be enough to start." The discussion continued, each obstacle finding collective solutions that arose from shared determination. Elena watched in amazement, How people who just a few months ago barely spoke to each other now complemented each other's ideas and strengths. There's something else we need to consider, Elena said when the conversation began to focus on logistical details. The Montgomerys are trying to divide us, create resentment between those who belong to the cooperative and those who don't. We must counteract that. How? Asked Mrs. Josephine. We can't compete with the prices they're paying. Not with money, Elena agreed, but with solidarity. I propose that we allocate a portion of our harvest to create a community food bank, open to all families in the valley, whether or not they are members of the cooperative. A murmur of surprise ran through the assembly. In times of scarcity, sharing seemed contradictory. Elena is right, Eduardo supported. The Montgomerys use their money to create divisions. We must use our resources to create community. It's an investment in trust, and in the long run, that's worth more than any amount of money. By the end of the meeting, a complete plan had taken shape. They would establish a sales stall on the main road, organize shared transportation shifts to take products to the city, and create the community food bank as a tangible demonstration that the cooperative existed to benefit the entire valley, not just its members. As the assembly dispersed, Eleanor noticed that Johnny had been watching intently from a corner, his notebook full of notes and drawings. "What did you think of the meeting?" she asked, curious about his perspective. "I think Mr. Montgomery is wrong," the boy replied with the simple clarity that only childhood allows. "He thinks that if he has more money than us, he's going to win. But we have more people and more ideas. That's worth more, right?" Elena hugged her nephew, moved by his intuition. "Exactly, Johnny. Some riches can't be bought with money." The following days passed in a frenzy of activity. The roadside stall took shape quickly, with everyone contributing what they could. Wood from Don Miguel's old barn, colorful tarps that Mrs. Remedios had saved for years, boxes and woven baskets made by the women during the evenings. Martin's pickup truck, which many considered irreparable, was reborn under the skillful hands of Tom and Johnny, who worked tirelessly to get the engine running again. To Elena's surprise, Lily demonstrated a natural talent for design, creating eye-catching posters to advertise the cooperative's products. Her drawings of fruits and vegetables were so vibrant and attractive that they decided to use them to create a distinctive logo, a stylized milpa surrounded by water droplets symbolizing the springs of Green Valley Ranch. The day of the stall's inauguration dawned clear and bright, as if even the weather wanted to favor their undertaking. Elena woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep, and found Tom already up, preparing the pickup truck for the first trip. "Do you think it will work, Tom?" she asked, helping him load the boxes of freshly harvested vegetables. "It's already working, Elena," the old man replied with a serene smile. "Look around you." Elena followed his gaze and saw what he saw. Dozens of people converging on Green Valley Ranch from all directions, bringing their best products, helping each other load, laughing and chatting with the energy that only hope can grant. Even some farmers who hadn't wanted to join the cooperative initially had shown up with small contributions, drawn in by the growing solidarity radiating from Green Valley Ranch. When the sun was already high in the sky, a caravan of product-laden vehicles set off for the highway, led by the restored pickup truck that Johnny had insisted on decorating with colorful ribbons. The stall, strategically located where the main road intersected with secondary routes, soon attracted the attention of travelers and local buyers. The fair prices, the exceptional quality of the products, and the enthusiastic atmosphere created an irresistible combination. By mid-afternoon, almost all the products had been sold, and the community food bank had received its first substantial donations. More importantly, countless conversations had sprung up between cooperative members and neighbors who were beginning to reconsider their participation. "It seems we've hit the nail on the head," Eduardo commented, sitting next to Elena in a moment of calm. "People don't just want good products, they want to feel part of something meaningful." Elena nodded, watching Lily proudly explain the meaning of the logo she had designed to a family of tourists. "It's what my father always said. The land gives us more than food, it gives us identity, purpose, community." Eduardo covered Elena's hand with his, a simple gesture but full of meaning. "Your father would be very proud today." The contact sent a warm current through Elena's arm, surprising her with its intensity. In recent months, she had been so focused on the survival of Green Valley Ranch and the cooperative that she had barely had time to notice how her relationship with Eduardo had gradually evolved from a professional alliance to something deeper. Their gazes met briefly, a silent question floating between them, but they were interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed. 3 luxurious pickup trucks bearing the Montgomery emblem stopped in front of the stall, kicking up clouds of dust. Richard descended from the first, his expression darkened by a mixture of surprise and irritation. "It seems you're having a productive day," he commented, his voice forcedly casual as he examined the almost empty shelves. "Very productive, thank you," Elena replied, standing up. "Are you interested in buying anything? We still have some aromatic herbs and mountain honey." Richard ignored her offer, strolling slowly through the stall, taking mental note of every detail. "I must admit I'm impressed, Elena. You've managed to organize all this in a very short time. It shows determination. Collective determination," she corrected. "Every person here has contributed their work and their ideas." "No doubt." Richard stopped in front of the map of the region where they had marked the location of all the participating plots. An impressive display of solidarity. Too bad it's so fragile. "What do you mean?" Eduardo interjected, standing next to Elena. "Reality, Engineer Mendoza. You're selling top-quality products at prices that barely cover your costs. It's unsustainable." Richard made a broad gesture encompassing the entire stall. "This is a mirage, a beautiful illusion that will vanish with the first serious crisis." Elena felt the tension rising around her, the joy of the day threatened by Richard's calculated words. But before she could respond, an unexpected voice rose. "You're wrong, Mr. Montgomery." Everyone turned towards Johnny, who had been listening silently. The boy stepped forward, holding one of the woven baskets containing the last products. "This isn't a mirage, it's just the beginning. Every dollar we earn today isn't just money, it's trust. And with every person who joins us, we grow stronger." The boy pointed towards the cornfields visible in the distance. "You see only products and profits. We see community and future." An astonished silence followed his words. Richard looked at the boy with a mixture of surprise and discomfort, clearly disconcerted by being challenged by someone so young and with such conviction. "Wise words for someone so small," he finally said, regaining his composure. "Your aunt must be proud to have taught you so well." "I didn't need to be taught to see the obvious," Johnny replied with devastating simplicity. A restrained laugh ran through the crowd that had gathered, and Richard, sensing that he had lost ground in this public exchange, opted for a strategic retreat. "I wish you luck with your social experiment," he said, turning again to Eleanor. "You'll need it when the rains are scarce, and your harvests depend on something more substantial than good intentions." With those words, he returned to his vehicles and left, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a community momentarily silenced by the implicit threat. "What did he mean by that?" Mrs. Josephine asked, as the vehicles disappeared into the distance. Elena and Eduardo exchanged worried glances. The threat had been barely veiled. The Montgomerys knew the importance of the underground springs and were willing to interfere with them somehow. "It means we need to accelerate the second phase of the project," Eduardo replied, addressing everyone present. "The protection of our water sources can no longer wait." The return to Green Valley Ranch that night was jubilant despite the shadow cast by Richard's visit. The day's earnings had exceeded all expectations, and more importantly, they had shown that there was a market eager for products grown with sustainable methods. As the community celebrated around a makeshift bonfire, sharing food and recounting anecdotes of the day, Elena stepped aside momentarily, seeking a few minutes of solitude to process everything that had happened. She walked to the edge of the property, where an ancient oak tree offered a privileged view of the valley bathed in the silvery light of the moon. From there she could see the lights of the scattered houses, each representing a family that was now part of something bigger than itself. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eduardo said, approaching silently. "And fragile," Elena replied, Richard's words still echoing in her mind. "Everything we've built could be lost if the Montgomerys carry out their threat." Eduardo stood next to her, their shoulders almost touching. "We won't let that happen, Elena. I've already contacted a lawyer specializing in water rights. The underground springs are resources protected by law. If they try anything, they'll be violating multiple regulations. Laws don't always protect those who need them most," Elena sighed, remembering how her father had fought in vain against legally sanctioned injustices. "That's true, but now we're not alone." Eduardo turned gently towards her, his eyes reflecting the determination he had shown from day one. What you've achieved here, Elena, goes beyond irrigation systems or agricultural techniques. You've rebuilt something that was being lost. Mutual trust, the ability to dream collectively. Elena felt the weight of his words, the truth in them resonating with something deep within herself. We all achieved it together. But it started with you, Eduardo insisted, his voice lowering to a more intimate tone. Your courage in challenging the Montgomerys, your generosity in opening Green Valley Ranch to the community, your vision to see possibilities where others only saw problems. The conversation was suspended between them, charged with unspoken words and feelings that had grown silently during months of shared work, common dreams, and mutual respect. Eduardo took a step closer, gently taking Elena's hands in his. I've wanted to tell you for weeks what you mean to me, Elena, not just as a collaborator on this project, but as a woman, as a person. Elena's heart beat strongly, her emotions in conflict. Part of her longed for this moment, had even dreamed of it. Another part feared the vulnerability it implied after years of focusing solely on survival. Eduardo, she began, unsure how to express the storm of feelings she was experiencing. He waited patiently, his eyes never leaving hers, offering the space and time she needed. I'm afraid, she finally confessed, not of you but of feeling, of allowing myself to feel something that could be lost. I've already lost so much in my life. I know, he replied softly, and I'll respect any decision you make. I just wanted you to know that whatever happens with the cooperative, with the Montgomerys, or with Green Valley Ranch, what I feel for you is real and independent of all that. A moment of silence passed between them, full of possibilities. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, Eduardo continued. Just the promise that when all this settles down, we'll talk about us, about what we could be together. Elena felt a warm certainty expand within her chest, gradually dissolving the fear that had kept her emotions at bay for so long. I'd like that, she finally replied, gently squeezing Eduardo's hands, to talk about possibilities, about the future. The smile that lit up Eduardo's face mirrored the one Elena felt growing within herself. At that moment, under the ancient oak tree that had witnessed generations of joys and sorrows, they sealed a silent promise, as deep and nourishing as the springs that flowed beneath their feet. In the distance, the music and laughter of the celebration continued, a reminder that life went on, with its challenges and its blessings, its threats and its promises. And for the first time in many years, Elena allowed herself to imagine a future that contained not only responsibilities and struggles, but also personal joy and companionship. It was an unexpected fruit of all her effort, as valuable as the harvests that were now flourishing in the fields of Green Valley Ranch. The forecast the elders had repeated for months finally came true. The rainy season arrived 2 weeks late, and with far less intensity than normal. What should have been a period of daily downpours became an erratic sequence of insufficient drizzles, barely enough to wet the soil's surface without penetrating to the roots. For many farmers in the valley, this partial drought meant a direct threat to their crops. But for the cooperative members, it represented the first real test of the systems they had implemented over the past few months. This is when we'll see if our efforts were worthwhile, Eduardo commented during an emergency meeting in the Green Valley Ranch barn. The water reservoirs we built should be enough to sustain the crops for 3 weeks. If the situation doesn't improve by then, we'll have to ration the water and prioritize certain crops over others. The faces around the table reflected concern, but also a newfound determination. It was no longer the paralyzing fear of isolated farmers facing a climate crisis. It was the shared anxiety of a community prepared to work collectively. The Montgomerys are already taking advantage of the situation, reported Mr. Esteban, whose plot bordered the ranch lands. They've put up signs offering guaranteed water reserves to those who sell them their land now. A murmur of indignation ran through the assembly. The tactic was typical of Richard, to exploit fear in moments of vulnerability to expand his dominance. We must stick together, Eleanor said, standing up, and demonstrate with actions, not just words, that our system works better. I propose that we open our reservoirs not only to cooperative members, but to any family in the valley who needs it. But we barely have enough for ourselves, someone objected from the back. If we ration carefully, we can manage it, Johnny interjected, unfolding a detailed map where he had meticulously calculated the water consumption of each type of crop. Besides, the main well is connecting with the underground springs. As long as we don't extract more than what regenerates naturally, we'll have a constant supply. Eleanor smiled proudly at her nephew's intervention. At 11, Johnny had become a water management expert, studying tirelessly with Eduardo and applying his natural intelligence to practical problems. Elena's proposal was approved by a majority, though not without some resistance. The next day, an announcement appeared in the town square. Water available for agricultural emergencies at Green Valley Ranch, free of charge, bring your own containers. The response was immediate. Dozens of independent farmers arrived with all kinds of containers, from buckets to makeshift tanks in their pickup truck beds. Eleanor, Tom, and the other cooperative members worked tirelessly, distributing the precious water and explaining efficient irrigation techniques to maximize its use. "It's surprising," Mrs. Josephine commented as she helped fill jugs. "6 months ago, many of these same farmers barely greeted us. Now they look at us with respect, even gratitude." Elena nodded, observing the interactions around her. The crisis had created a space for solidarity that might not have arisen under normal circumstances. Every farmer who received water also received information about the cooperative drought-resistant seeds and an open invitation to join them. By the 3rd week of drought, the difference between the cooperative's fields and the others was evident even to the most inexperienced eye. While many plots showed yellowish withered plants, the lands irrigated with Green Valley Ranch's system looked green and vigorous, their crops well on their way to a healthy harvest. What no one expected, however, was the sudden appearance of Richard Montgomery at Green Valley Ranch one afternoon, accompanied not by his usual foreman, but by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. "Eleanor," Richard greeted with unusual formality, "allow me to introduce Mr. Gutierrez, legal representative of Montgomery Agri-Industries." Elena shook the lawyer's hand cautiously, noticing how several cooperative members left their tasks to approach, instinctively creating a protective circle around her. "How can we help you?" she asked, maintaining a cordial tone despite the evident tension. Mr. Gutierrez opened his briefcase and pulled out several official documents with government seals. "I'm here to formally notify you of an ongoing investigation regarding the use of groundwater on this property." Eduardo, who had been supervising the irrigation system, quickly approached upon hearing this. "What kind of investigation?" "According to the National Water Act, any extraction of underground springs requires specific permits and environmental impact studies," the lawyer explained in a monotonous tone. "Our records indicate that Green Valley Ranch has initiated extraction operations without the corresponding permits." Eleanor felt a knot form in her stomach. They had applied for the necessary permits months ago, but the bureaucratic process was notoriously slow. Eduardo had assured them they could start on a small scale while waiting for official approval, a common practice in the region. "We have the applications pending," Eduardo replied, his voice firm but cautious. "And we're operating within the limits of small-scale domestic and agricultural use that are exempt from prior permits, according to Article 42 of the same law." The lawyer smiled condescendingly. "I'm afraid the mass distribution of water to third parties that you've been doing hardly qualifies as domestic use. Furthermore, we've received complaints about possible aquifer contamination due to experimental agricultural practices." "That's absurd," Tom exclaimed, unable to contain himself. "Our methods are completely organic, without a single chemical that could contaminate anything." "You'll have to prove that to the relevant authorities," Richard interjected with feigned concern. "In the meantime, I'm afraid you'll have to suspend all extraction operations until the investigation is complete." Elena looked directly into Richard's eyes, understanding perfectly the game he was playing. "And how long would it take to complete this investigation, Mr. Gutierrez?" "Difficult to say. Weeks, maybe months." The lawyer consulted his documents as if searching for a specific answer, although it was obvious he was improvising. "Administrative processes have their timelines. Right during the most critical period for our crops," Elena concluded, verbalizing what everyone was thinking. Richard spread his hands in a gesture of apparent helplessness. "The law is the law, Elena. Although if you're concerned about the well-being of the community, Montgomery Agri-Industries would be willing to provide water from our reservoirs at a reasonable price." The proposal hung in the air, like a veiled threat. Everyone understood the implications. The Montgomerys were using their influence to legally block access to the springs, forcing the cooperative to depend on them or watch their crops wither. We need time to consult with our own legal representative, Elena replied calmly, refusing to show the panic that was beginning to grow within her. Of course, Richard smiled. You have 48 hours to present your response and stop the extractions. After that deadline, I'll be forced to request a court order to shut down your facilities. When the unwelcome visitors left, a heavy silence fell over the assembled group. The implications were clear. Without access to the water from the springs, the crops wouldn't survive the prolonged drought. Everything they had worked for months was in danger. This is a setup, Eduardo finally said, his voice tense with indignation. The accusations of contamination are completely false, and they know it. But we'll have to prove our innocence, which will take time, Elena added. Time that our crops don't have. That night, while the children slept, the cooperative leaders met in the Green Valley Ranch kitchen to discuss strategies. The lawyer Eduardo had contacted months ago, a young idealist named Carlos Fuentes, specializing in community rights, had immediately come when he received the emergency call. The good news is that you're legally right, he explained, after reviewing all the documentation. Your applications were submitted correctly, and indeed you are operating within the permitted limits for agricultural use, without the need for additional permits. And the bad news? Elena asked, recognizing the implicit but in his tone, that the Montgomerys have influence in the National Water Commission. They can delay the process long enough to cause irreversible damage to your crops. Carlos took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes tiredly. They're also taking advantage of a legal loophole. The free distribution of water you've been doing isn't technically covered in the uses exempt from permits. So, what options do we have? Mrs. Josephine interjected. Legally, we can file an injunction arguing that you're exercising an ancestral community right to water. The Constitution and several international treaties signed by the United States recognize these customary rights, especially in rural and indigenous communities. And in the meantime, Eduardo asked, aware that legal processes rarely offered immediate solutions. Carlos hesitated before answering. In the meantime, technically you should suspend water extractions that exceed Green Valley Ranch's personal use. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The reality was brutally clear. Complying with the law meant condemning the crops of dozens of families. It was then that Johnny, who had been listening silently from the doorway, stepped forward. What if we didn't need to extract more water from the subsoil? Everyone turned to him, confused. Explain yourself, Johnny, Elena encouraged him. I've been studying the old maps that Tom found, the boy began, unfolding a worn piece of paper on the table. The underground springs have points where they naturally come close to the surface. Here, here, and here. He pointed to 3 locations on the map. If we dig shallow wells at these points, technically we wouldn't be extracting groundwater, but collecting natural surface flows. Eduardo studied the map with growing enthusiasm. Johnny's right. These are natural springs that have traditionally been considered communal resources, not subject to the same regulations as deep wells. Would it work legally? Elena asked, addressing Carlos. The lawyer nodded slowly, a smile forming on his lips. It's a perfectly defensible interpretation of the law. Natural surface springs have historically been considered communal property, especially if there is historical evidence of their use by the community. And there is, Tom confirmed. My grandfather told me how before the Montgomerys installed their industrial irrigation systems, the whole town came to these points to collect water during droughts. A new plan began to take shape. They would quickly dig shallow wells at the indicated points, build simple collection systems that would take advantage of the natural surface flow of the water, and continue distribution under the legal argument of exercising an ancestral community right. The next 36 hours were a frenzy of activity. Men and women worked tirelessly, digging, building, transporting materials. To Elena's surprise, even farmers who didn't belong to the cooperative volunteered, understanding that this struggle transcended individual interests. When Richard Montgomery and his lawyer returned exactly 48 hours later, they found a scene they clearly didn't expect. Instead of the deep pumping system they had denounced, they found 3 simple shallow wells surrounded by stones, each with a small altar decorated with flowers and traditional offerings, as was customary in indigenous water blessing ceremonies. What is this? Richard asked, disconcerted by the transformation. We are honoring and using the traditional springs of Green Valley Ranch, Eleanor replied serenely. as families in this valley have done for generations, long before there were written laws about water rights. Carlos Fuentes stepped forward, handing Montgomery's lawyer a hastily prepared legal document. Here you will find historical testimonies of the community use of these natural springs, along with a formal request for their recognition as intangible cultural heritage according to the relevant articles of the federal law on monuments and archaeological, artistic and historical zones. Richard's face went from confusion to indignation as he understood the strategy. This is a legal trick, a maneuver to evade the law. On the contrary, Carlos replied with professional calm, it's a legitimate exercise of communal rights recognized by the Constitution and international treaties. If you wish to challenge these rights, you will have to do so in federal courts, which will surely attract the attention of indigenous and environmental organizations nationwide. The implicit threat was clear. The Montgomerys could use their local influence, but a case involving indigenous rights and access to water could quickly become a celebrated cause that would attract unwanted scrutiny of their business practices. Richard looked around, noticing how dozens of community members had gathered in silent support, many of them wearing traditional symbols and clothing that emphasized their indigenous heritage. The situation had transformed from a simple legal procedure into a potential public relations disaster. This isn't over, he warned, gesturing to his lawyer to retreat. We will review these documents and respond appropriately. When the Montgomery vehicles disappeared into the distance, a wave of contained jubilation ran through the assembled community. It wasn't a definitive victory, everyone knew, but they had gained crucial time for their crops to mature. How did you know it would work, Johnny? Elena asked her nephew as the community celebrated around the newly built wells. I read it in one of Mr. Raoul's books, the boy explained simply. It talked about how Zapotec communities have defended their waters for centuries. I thought we could do the same. Elena hugged her nephew, moved by his intuition and wisdom. Your grandfather would be very proud of you today. You found a solution where the adults only saw obstacles. The following days passed in tense calm. The cooperative continued to operate cautiously, distributing water and maintaining the crops with the improvised system. The shallow wells produced less water than the original system, which meant rationing and carefully organized shifts, but it was enough to keep hope alive. A week after the confrontation, clouds began to gather on the horizon. At first, no one dared to mention it, afraid of raising false hopes. But when the unmistakable aroma of damp earth and ozone filled the air, even the most skeptical looked up to the sky. A storm's coming, Tom announced, his old bones more accurate than any modern barometer. And not just any passing shower, it's the one we've been waiting for. That night, as Eleanor finished reviewing the water distribution records, the first thunder rumbled in the distance. Lily, who had been drawing silently at the kitchen table, ran to the window with bright eyes of expectation. Aunt Elena, look, she exclaimed, pointing to the first heavy drops that were beginning to hit the glass. Soon, what had begun as scattered drops became a solid curtain of water. The rain fell with almost violent intensity, as if the sky was making up for all the weeks of drought. The gutters they had installed months ago now fully demonstrated their value, collecting torrents that quickly filled the reservoirs. Elena went out onto the porch, letting the rain splatter her face, mixing with tears of relief she hadn't even noticed she was shedding. Through the veil of water, she saw figures approaching, community members who, instead of taking shelter, had come out to celebrate the gift falling from the sky. The crops are saved, Mrs. Josephine shouted over the roar of the rain, her grey hair plastered to her cheeks by the moisture. It's a miracle. But Elena knew that it wasn't a miracle that had saved Green Valley Ranch and the cooperative. It was collective determination, shared knowledge, and the courage to defend what was right. The rain was just the final blessing on a land they had prepared with sweat and hope. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, immediately followed by a deafening roar. The lightning bolt had struck dangerously close, reminding them that the storm, though welcome, also brought dangers. Everyone inside, Elena ordered, guiding the small crowd towards the shelter of the house. The storm is intensifying. For the next few hours, nature's fury unleashed itself upon the valley. Lightning intermittently illuminated the room full of neighbors who had gathered at Green Valley Ranch, telling stories, sharing food, and creating a makeshift community shelter. Eduardo and Johnny constantly monitored the water levels in the reservoirs and the condition of the drainage channels. ensuring that the system they had designed could handle the sudden excess after so much scarcity. "The system is working perfectly," Eduardo reported, returning soaked but smiling. "The reservoirs are almost full, and the diversion channels are directing the excess exactly where it needs to go." As the night progressed, the storm began to subside, transforming into a steady but gentle rain that promised to continue until dawn. One by one, the neighbors began to say goodbye, returning to their homes with relieved hearts and renewed hopes. When finally only those closest to Elena remained, Tom, Eduardo, Raul, and some other cooperative leaders, they allowed themselves to openly discuss what everyone was thinking. "The Montgomerys won't give up that easily," Tom said, always practical even in moments of celebration. "This rain gives us time, but the fundamental conflict over the springs continues." Elena nodded, aware that the old man was right. "We need a permanent solution, not just to buy time." "I have news about that," Carlos interjected, who had remained in constant communication since the legal confrontation. "I've been researching the property's historical records in the capital, and I found something that could change the whole picture." Everyone leaned forward, intrigued. According to documents from the land reform of the 1930s, the underground springs of Green Valley Ranch were explicitly declared as community resources, not as private property. This designation was never formally revoked, just forgotten over time. "Are you saying that legally the water already belongs to the community?" Eduardo asked, disbelief mixed with hope in his voice. "Exactly," Carlos nodded, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "I filed a formal petition for the reinstatement of this status. If it's accepted, neither the Montgomerys nor any other private owner will be able to claim exclusive rights to the springs." The news was so unexpected, so potentially transformative, that for a moment no one knew what to say. Finally, it was Tom who broke the silence with a deep laugh that seemed to spring from the depths of his being. "Alberto knew it," he said, looking at Elena with bright eyes. "That's why he never sold, no matter how much the Montgomerys pressured him. He knew that this land held more than just a family legacy. It held a community right." Elena felt a surge of gratitude towards her father, whose stubbornness and principles now revealed a wisdom that went beyond the personal. Alberto Alvarez had not only protected Green Valley Ranch for his family, but for the entire community. Outside, the rain continued to fall gently, a constant murmur promising renewal and growth. Elena looked around at these faces that had gone from being acquaintances to becoming extended family. Tom with his ancestral wisdom, Eduardo with his modern knowledge and sincere heart, Johnny and Lily growing in an environment where their talents could flourish, and all the others who had helped transform a crisis into an opportunity. "The promised storm finally arrived," she said softly. "Both the literal and the figurative, and we've survived both together." Eduardo discreetly took her hand, a gesture that now felt natural and comforting. "And we'll come out stronger for it," he added with a smile that seemed to contain promises beyond words. As the night progressed and the conversation flowed freely between future plans and shared memories, Elena felt a certainty settle in her heart. Regardless of the final outcome of the legal battle, Green Valley Ranch had already triumphed in what mattered most. It had regained its identity as a land of hope, not just for one family, but for an entire community that had rediscovered its collective power. The morning after the storm dawned with a clarity that seemed to wash the world clean. Elena went out onto the porch before anyone else, breathing deeply the purified air, charged with the scent of wet earth and renewed vegetation. The entire valley shone under the golden light of dawn, as if it had been created anew during the night. The fields, which just yesterday showed signs of drought stress, now glowed with an intensified green. The raindrops that still clung to the leaves reflected the light like tiny prisms, transforming each plant into a living jewel. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Johnny said, joining his aunt with hair tousled from sleep. "As if the whole valley is smiling." Eleanor nodded, putting an arm around her nephew's shoulders. "And largely thanks to you. Your idea about the springs saved our crops." The boy smiled, a blush of pride coloring his cheeks. "I just remembered what I had read. Everyone worked to make it happen." The following weeks passed in a frenzy of renewed activity. The rain had arrived just in time to save most of the crops, and now the cooperative worked tirelessly to maximize the harvest. The threat of the Montgomerys remained, but Carlos's legal petition had provided them with a temporary reprieve. While the courts considered the case, A provisional order allowed the cooperative to continue using the springs under neutral supervision. As July gave way to August, the fields of Green Valley Ranch and the cooperative's plots began to show the first ripe fruits. The corn cobs swelled promisingly within their green husks, the climbing beans covered their supports with abundant pods, and the pumpkins spread across the ground like orange and yellow sentinels. "It'll be a good harvest," Tom proclaimed one afternoon as he and Elena walked through the fields. "Not the most abundant I've ever seen, but considering how close we came to disaster, it's almost a miracle." Elena nodded, thoughtful. "Do you think the Montgomerys will try something else before the harvest?" The old man looked towards the horizon, where the ranch lands stretched like a constant reminder of the threat they represented. "Richard is proud and cunning. He won't easily accept this defeat." His words proved prophetic. That same afternoon, while supervising the repair of one of the irrigation channels, Eleanor noticed a cloud of dust on the main road, a sign of vehicles approaching at high speed. Moments later, 3 Montgomery Agri-Industries trucks stopped in front of Green Valley Ranch. Richard descended from the first, accompanied not only by his usual lawyer, but also by 2 men in official uniforms that Elena recognized as Ministry of Agriculture inspectors. "Eleanor," Richard greeted with false cordiality, "I'm sorry to interrupt your day, but these gentlemen need to conduct an urgent inspection of your crops." "Inspection? For what purpose?" she asked, maintaining her composure despite the alarm she felt. One of the inspectors stepped forward, showing an official ID. "We've received reports of possible biological contamination in this area, specifically the presence of late blight in the crops." Eleanor held her breath. Late blight was a devastating disease that could destroy entire fields in a matter of days. An official declaration of infection would result in immediate quarantine and possibly the preventive destruction of all crops within a considerable radius. "That's impossible," she replied firmly. "Our crops are inspected regularly. There are no signs of disease." "We'll determine that, ma'am," the second inspector interjected, his tone professional but severe. "I recommend that you cooperate fully." Eduardo, alerted by one of the workers, hurried over upon hearing the commotion. Quickly taking control of the situation, he invited the inspectors to tour the fields, offering to show them each plot personally. "Of course, we'll cooperate fully," he assured with a calmness that impressed Elena. "Our phytosanitary records are up to date and available for your review." While the inspectors began their tour, accompanied by Eduardo and some cooperative members, Richard stayed behind with his lawyer, watching the scene with poorly concealed satisfaction. "A shame this happens right before the harvest," he commented, his voice full of false sympathy. "Blight can spread quickly, you know. Sometimes the only solution is to burn entire fields to contain it." Eleanor looked directly at him, recognizing the implicit threat. "What do you gain from this, Richard? Destroying our work just to prove you can?" For a moment, Richard's mask slipped, revealing something more complex than simple malice. "What I gain is maintaining the established order, Elena. This valley has functioned in a certain way for decades. Yours, a community experiment, threatens that balance. The balance where a few prosper while many barely survive," she retorted, unable to contain her indignation. Richard shrugged. "Call it what you want, but that's how the real world works. There are always those who lead and those who follow. Pretending otherwise is naive." Before Elena could respond, a commotion from the fields caught her attention. One of the inspectors was gesticulating animatedly, pointing to something among the corn plants. Elena felt her heart stop. "It seems they found something," Richard smiled. "How unfortunate." Elena ran towards the group, fearing the worst. Upon arriving, she found Eduardo bent over a corn plant, examining it carefully while arguing with the inspector. "This isn't late blight," Eduardo stated with conviction. "It's simply residual water stress from the drought, which is already subsiding thanks to the recent rains." "That doesn't explain these lesions on the leaves," the inspector argued, pointing to dark spots on the foliage. "Let me show you something," Johnny unexpectedly interjected. The boy had been following the inspection silently, absorbing every detail with his sharp mind. "These aren't blight lesions. Blight produces a specific pattern, like a burn that spreads. These are marks from beneficial insects that laid their eggs here. It's part of our biological pest control system." The inspector looked at the boy with surprise, clearly not expecting a technical explanation from someone so young. "Biological control?" "Yes, sir," Johnny nodded seriously. "We use ladybugs and lacewings to control aphids and other harmful insects. I can show you our release and monitoring records. The second inspector, who had been examining plants in another section, approached with a thoughtful expression. The boy might be right. These marks don't follow the typical blight pattern, and I haven't found any plants with advanced symptoms, which would be expected if there were a real infection. For the next 2 hours, the inspectors meticulously toured each plot, taking samples, photographing plants, and consulting their manuals. To Richard's evident dismay, their expressions gradually shifted from suspicion to professional interest, especially when Eduardo and Johnny explained the various sustainable methods the cooperative had implemented. I've never seen such an integrated pest control system on this scale in a small operation, the lead inspector finally commented, putting away his instruments. It's truly impressive. So, there's no blight? Eleanor asked, needing to hear the official confirmation. There's no evidence of late blight or any other reportable disease, the inspector confirmed. In fact, these crops are among the healthiest I've seen this season. Congratulations on your work. Richard, who had been watching from a distance, approached with evident irritation. Are you sure you checked properly? The report we received was quite specific. We've been thorough, Mr. Montgomery, the inspector replied with professional coldness. And I must add that submitting false reports of agricultural diseases is a serious administrative offense that can result in substantial fines. Richard's face hardened, but he maintained his composure. With a brief nod of his head, he gestured to his lawyer and foreman to retreat. It seems there was a misunderstanding. I'm glad your crops are healthy, Elena. When the Montgomery vehicles disappeared into the distance, followed shortly after by the inspectors, a sense of collective relief swept over Green Valley Ranch. However, Eleanor knew this had been just another battle in a longer war. They'll try something else, she said to Eduardo as they watched the horizon. Richard isn't a man who gives up easily. I know, he agreed, but with each failed attempt they reveal more about their tactics and lose more credibility. Meanwhile, we grow stronger. That night, Carlos Fuentes arrived with promising news. The judge assigned to the Springs case had decided to schedule a preliminary hearing sooner than expected, possibly influenced by the growing media attention the conflict was attracting. Several national newspapers and environmental organizations are following the case, Carlos explained, with barely contained enthusiasm. They're framing it as a struggle between traditional farmers protecting natural resources and a corporation trying to monopolize water. It's exactly the kind of narrative the Montgomerys wanted to avoid. The news was received with cautious optimism by the cooperative leaders gathered in the Green Valley Ranch kitchen. A legal victory would set an important precedent, potentially inspiring other communities to claim their rights over shared natural resources. As the meeting continued, Elena excused herself briefly to check on the children. She found Lily already asleep, her breathing soft and regular, but Johnny was awake, sitting by the open window overlooking the fields. You should be sleeping, she said softly, sitting next to him. It's been a long day. I was thinking, Johnny replied, his eyes reflecting the silvery moonlight bathing the fields, about what Mr. Montgomery said today, about leaders and followers. Elena sat beside him, watching the dark silhouettes of the plants swaying gently in the night breeze. And what do you think about that? I think he didn't understand what's really happening here, Johnny said after a moment of reflection. It's not about who leads and who follows. It's about everyone contributing something different. Like in the milpa, the corn provides support, the beans nourish the soil, the squash protects the ground. None is more important than the other. Elena felt a surge of pride and emotion at her nephew's wisdom. That's a very beautiful way to see it, Johnny, and I think you're absolutely right. Grandpa explained it to me once, the boy continued, a nostalgic smile lighting up his face. He said the milpa is like life itself. Each plant has its purpose, and together they create something better than any could achieve alone. Elena hugged him, moved by the memory. Her father had passed his knowledge to the next generation, seeds of wisdom that were now flourishing in circumstances he would never have imagined. Now let's get some sleep, she finally said. Tomorrow will be another day full of work. Johnny nodded, sliding under the blankets. Good night, Aunt Elena. I'm glad we didn't sell Green Valley Ranch. Me too, my boy, Elena whispered. Me too. The following days flowed with the natural rhythm of the earth preparing for harvest. The community worked with renewed energy, aware that each step brought them closer to the culmination of months of effort and overcoming challenges. A week before the scheduled harvest date, Carlos arrived at Green Valley Ranch with news that changed everything. The judge had issued a preliminary ruling favorable to the cooperative, recognizing the community's historical rights to the underground springs. It's not a definitive victory, he explained, but it establishes that while the case continues, the Montgomerys can't interfere with our access to water. And more importantly, the judge specifically cited the importance of preserving traditional agricultural practices as living cultural heritage. The news spread through the valley like wildfire. That same afternoon, 3 more families showed up at Green Valley Ranch requesting to join the cooperative. The tide was shifting, slowly but firmly, in favor of the community. Harvest day dawned perfect, with clear skies and an ideal temperature for fieldwork. According to local tradition, Green Valley Ranch's plots would be the first to be harvested, followed by the other cooperative properties in an order determined by need and crop maturity. Elena woke before dawn, moved by a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. This would be the first full cycle since she had fully assumed responsibility for the property, the first harvest that marked the rebirth of Green Valley Ranch under her management. She dressed carefully in her best embroidered blouse, a garment she rarely wore except on special occasions. Then she woke the children, who had fallen asleep late the night before, too excited to go to bed early. When they went out to the patio, they found Tom already prepared, using the ceremonial machete that had belonged to Elena's grandfather, now decorated with colorful ribbons for the occasion. "Good morning, Elena," the old man greeted with a formality he only used on significant dates. "The field is ready to yield its fruits." Together, they walked to the edge of the main milpa, where cooperative members and neighbors who had come to participate in the celebration were already gathering. Eduardo was among them, wearing a traditional shirt that Raul had given him for the occasion. When the first ray of sun appeared over the horizon, Elena stepped forward, facing the assembled community. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear in the morning air. "What we harvest today isn't just corn, beans, and squash. It's the fruit of our collective courage, our willingness to defend what is right, and our faith that together we can create a better future than we could achieve separately." Tom stepped forward, offering her the ceremonial machete. As is tradition, the first ear of corn will be cut by whoever leads the land. Elena took the machete, feeling its significant weight, but before advancing towards the crops, she stopped. "This year, I'd like to share this honor," she said, turning towards Johnny and Lily, "because Green Valley Ranch belongs not only to the past or the present, but also to the future. And they are that future." A murmur of approval ran through the assembly as the children approached, their eyes shining with excitement and pride. Elena guided both their hands over the machete's handle, and together they cut the first 3 ears of corn, one large, one medium, and one small, symbolizing the past, present, and future generations united in a continuous cycle. As soon as the ears of corn were presented to the community, the work began in earnest. Organized teams methodically advanced through the fields, harvesting efficiently, but also with the reverential respect the occasion deserved. Traditional harvest songs floated in the air, mingling with laughter and conversation. Mid-morning, when the work was in full swing, a familiar sound interrupted the activity. Vehicles approaching on the main road. Elena felt everyone around her tense up, anticipating another attempt by the Montgomerys to sabotage their special day. To everyone's surprise, only one vehicle appeared. Richard Montgomery's personal pickup truck without escort or lawyers. The rancher got out alone, observing with an indecipherable expression the scene before him. Dozens of people working coordinately, baskets overflowing with golden ears of corn, the atmosphere festive but disciplined. Elena handed her basket to Tom and stepped forward to meet Richard halfway, determined not to let his presence disrupt the celebration. "Mr. Montgomery," she greeted with formal courtesy. "Have you come to witness our harvest?" Richard observed the fields for a long moment before replying. "I've come to personally communicate a decision I've made." Elena waited, mentally preparing herself for any new threat or intimidating tactic. Montgomery Agri-Industries will withdraw its legal opposition to the recognition of the springs as a community resource, he finally said, his voice containing a note of resignation Elena had never heard before. "Why?" she asked, genuinely surprised by this unexpected turn. Richard gestured, encompassing the scene before them. "Because I recognize a lost battle when I see one, Elena. It's not just the legal aspect, it's this. He pointed towards the community working, towards the children running among the adults with water containers, towards the elders supervising the quality of the harvest. You've created something that can't be dismantled with lawsuits or economic pressure. Elena studied his face, searching for signs of deception, but found only pragmatic resignation. What does this mean for the cooperative and the Montgomerys in the future? It means we'll seek to coexist, Richard replied, carefully choosing his words. We have resources that you don't, and now you have something that we can't replicate. Perhaps there's room for mutually beneficial arrangements. It wasn't a complete surrender, nor a miraculous conversion of values. It was simply the calculated recognition of a businessman who knew when to change strategy. But for Elena, it represented something important, the first step towards lasting peace in the valley. We'll be open to future conversations, Mr. Montgomery, she replied with balanced diplomacy, as long as they're based on mutual respect and shared benefit. Richard nodded briefly, observing once more the activity around him before returning to his vehicle. There was no handshake or elaborate promises, just a tacit acknowledgement that a stage of the conflict had concluded. When Eduardo approached moments later, his expression reflected the same hopeful caution Elena felt. Is it really over? He asked. This phase, yes, she replied, watching the cloud of dust left by Richard's truck. What comes next will depend on us as much as on them. The harvest continued without further interruptions, extending over several days as each cooperative plot yielded its fruits. The results exceeded expectations. Despite the drought and all the obstacles faced, the yields were higher than in previous years, thanks to the new techniques implemented and the collective care. On the last day of the harvest, as the sun began its descent, the community gathered again at Green Valley Ranch for the final celebration. Long tables set under the trees bent under the weight of traditional dishes, prepared with the first fruits, tender corn on the cob roasted with chili and lime, fresh tamales wrapped in corn husks, sweet pumpkins cooked with piloncillo, and dozens of other delicacies that spoke of the land's generosity. Eduardo found Elena sitting on a log apart, observing the celebration with an expression of serene satisfaction. $1 for your thoughts? He asked, sitting beside her. How proud he would be to see this. Not just to see Green Valley Ranch prospering, Eduardo agreed, but to see how it has united the entire community. Exactly, Elena confirmed, her gaze sweeping over the assembled people. Johnny explaining some technical concept to other children with animated gestures, Lily proudly showing her plant drawings to the older women, Tom sharing stories with young people who until recently would have ignored an old man's wisdom, Carlos discussing with farmers their new legal rights. She smiled, accepting the glass of fresh water he offered. I was thinking about my father. Do you remember our conversation under the oak tree the night of the storm? Eduardo asked softly, his eyes meeting hers. Elena felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, about talking about possibilities when everything settled down. I think that time has come, he said, gently taking her hand. The cooperative is established. The water rights are secured, the children are flourishing, and my feelings for you have only deepened with each day we've worked together. Elena looked at their intertwined hands, feeling a quiet certainty that had taken months to build, like a seed that germinates slowly but with deep roots. Green Valley Ranch will always be my first love, she finally said. This land, these fields, this community are part of who I am. I know, Eduardo nodded, understanding in his gaze. But I've learned something important during these months, she continued, that the heart, like the earth, can nourish more than one harvest at a time. There's room for new beginnings without abandoning what we already love. The smile that lit up Eduardo's face was like the dawn after a long night. Does that mean? It means I'm ready to explore those possibilities you mentioned, Elena replied, finally allowing herself to express the feelings that had grown as naturally as the plants in their fields. Under the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the fruit of their shared work and the community they had helped strengthen, they sealed this new promise with a gentle kiss, as full of potential as a newly planted seed. When they returned to the celebration hand in hand, they were greeted with knowing but discreet smiles. Some things didn't need to be formally announced. They simply unfolded at their own natural pace, like everything important at Green Valley Ranch. As night fell and the stars began to appear in the velvety sky, Elena contemplated the valley that stretched beneath them. The freshly harvested fields would now rest, regaining strength for the next cycle. But even in this moment of pause, She could feel the promise of the future pulsing beneath the surface, new ideas germinating, new relationships blossoming, new possibilities taking shape. Green Valley Ranch had survived its most difficult season not by becoming something different, but by rediscovering and honoring its true essence, a place where the land, the water, and the people existed in reciprocal relationship, each nourishing the other in an eternal cycle of giving and receiving. The legacy that would now pass to Johnny and Lily was not simply a property or a means of subsistence, but a way of being in the world, with dignity, in community, and always with hope. And that, Elena reflected as the laughter and music of the celebration ascended towards the starry sky, was the most precious harvest of all. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you enjoy it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. Until next time.